The wind that swept across the southern steppes in the summer of 1942 carried more than dust. It carried the vibration of engines, thousands of them, rolling eastward in an iron tide. The plane shimmered under a white sun, and through that glare came the panzers of the 6th Army, a moving horizon of armor and ambition. Inside his headquarters in East Prussia, Adolf Hitler bent over a map whose rivers ran blue like veins across the flesh of the Soviet Union. His finger paused on a single name, Stalingrad. He said it softly, almost reverently, as if invoking a spell. A city on the Volga, a knot of steelworks and refineries. But to him, it was more. Stalin's city, the heart that pumped blood into the Red Empire. If we seize this, he murmured to his staff, the Bolshevik beast will bleed out. Around him, generals nodded with the confidence of men drunk on victory. France had fallen. Kiev, Kharkov, and Sevastopol lay behind them. The Wehrmacht seemed unstoppable, its banners snapping over half a continent. From the air came the promise of the Luftwaffe. Squadrons of Ju-87 Stukas shrieking as they dove, sirens grafted to their wings, so that even the air itself screamed German triumph. On the far side of the horizon, the Volga flowed sluggish and brown between cliffs of clay, reflecting the sun like a strip of molten copper. The city that bore Stalin's name stood crouched along its western bank, smoke already smudging the sky from distant bombardments. Its factories beat like iron hearts, forging tanks and bullets in rhythm with the war itself. Above that city, a red dawn thick with dust rose into view, a warning more than a sunrise. And somewhere between the crawling panzers and the sweating furnaces of Stalingrad, two destinies began to converge, one built on calculation, the other on endurance. The steppe held its breath. By late August 1942, the steppe roared. Columns of German armour advanced like an industrial storm, endless caterpillar tracks biting into the soil, trucks spitting black smoke, men wrapped in dust and victory. Overhead, the Luftwaffe darkened the sky with its silver cross-winged squadrons. The first bombs fell on Stalingrad at dawn. The city convulsed. Windows burst outward like crystal lungs expelling flame. Warehouses folded into themselves. The Volga boiled where incendiaries struck its surface, and the smell of burning oil drifted for miles. Steel plants, chemical works, and rail depots, all the bones of Soviet industry, collapsed into a single glowing skeleton. From the far shore, ferrymen watched as the skyline turned into a red furnace. General Friedrich Paulus stood in his command half-track, binoculars raised. Through the haze, Stalingrad looked finished. A dead city, he thought, lifeless and ready to be claimed. His staff agreed. The resistance can't survive this. Yet in the smouldering ruins, something ancient stirred, something no reconnaissance photo could show. For every building that fell, new firing positions were born. Collapsed floors became trenches. Shattered walls turned to sniper hides. Where the Luftwaffe believed it had erased the city, the Red Army saw fortification. Men and women who had lived ordinary lives only weeks before now melted into the rubble with rifles in hand. They called themselves the Stalingrad Militia, and their slogan spread faster than fire. Not one step back. The noose tightened. By September, Paulus's 6th Army had entered the city. What awaited them was not a battlefield, but a labyrinth. Each street was a canyon of debris, each factory a fortress. Gunfire echoed so closely it was impossible to tell who fired first. The Germans called it Rattenkrieg, the Rat War. Day after day, they crawled through stairwells, slick with dust and blood, fighting over rooms whose walls still bore Soviet propaganda peeling from the plaster. The Luftwaffe returned again and again, hammering the same ruins until the bombers seemed to hit only their own shadows. The more they destroyed, the deeper the defenders dug. At night, the river whispered with the creak of ferries bringing reinforcements across under cover of darkness. Red flares streaked the black sky. Tracer rounds arced like handwriting of fire. General Vasily Chuikov's 62nd Army clung to the western bank of the Volga, barely alive, yet unbroken. When asked about retreat, Chuikov's answer was quiet and absolute. "We will hold the city or die in it. There is no land beyond the Volga." By autumn's edge, Stalingrad no longer belonged to either side. It was a living wound, shared and cursed by both armies, a place where history itself seemed to be bleeding through the bricks. To the untrained eye, the map of southern Russia in autumn 1942 looked like a masterpiece of precision. Blue arrows radiated eastward from the German front lines, converging neatly upon the Volga like spears toward a single heart. On paper, it was elegant. In reality, it was suicide by geometry. Adolf Hitler's obsession had begun to dictate the tempo of the war. He saw not soldiers, but symbols, oil at Baku, wheat in the Don Basin, and above all, the city that bore his rival's name. He divided his forces, splitting the massive army group south into two blades, one thrusting toward the Caucasus oil fields, the other, Paulus's 6th Army, toward Stalingrad. By halving his sword, he blunted both edges. In the air, the Luftwaffe strained under the weight of Hitler's ambition. They were asked to be omnipresent, to bomb, to scout, to supply. Day after day, they flew sorties so numerous that maintenance crews slept beneath the wings of aircraft just to keep up. Engines overheated, pilots collapsed, and still the orders came. Destroy Stalingrad, crush its factories, flatten it. But each bomb that fell only deepened the city's labyrinth and thickened its smoke. The German advance slowed. Their logistics stretched into the steppe like a rubber band ready to snap. On the opposite side, the Soviet High Command, Stavka, watched with cold patience. In Moscow, beneath the Kremlin's dim lights, maps unfurled across a long oak table. Zhukov, Vasilevsky, and Stalin himself stood over them. Their silence was heavy, the silence of men who could see the trap forming but needed it to tighten further. Zhukov traced the line of the Don River with his gloved finger. They have no reserves on their flanks, only Romanians, Hungarians, Italians. The armor is all in the city. We shall strike where the wall is weakest. That was the birth of Operation Uranus, a counterstroke not of desperation, but of design. While the Germans bled street by street, the Soviets built a storm around them. Far north and south of Stalingrad, entire armies were being repositioned in silence, bridges constructed at night, trains painted with mud to blend into the steppe. The Germans, focused inward on the city, never noticed the tightening noose. Within Stalingrad itself, Paulus remained confident. His reports to Berlin spoke of steady progress and final objectives within reach. He trusted the system that had carried him from cadet to general: precision, calculation, obedience. He did not yet realize that war, unlike mathematics, is not a science of perfection, but of pressure. In his field headquarters, Paulus's aides adjusted pins on the map every evening, the front line creeping millimeters closer to the river. But the Volga was not a river of surrender. It was a current of time flowing against him. Every inch gained brought him deeper into the jaws of a plan already in motion. Outside, snow began to fall for the first time, soft, white, and silent. The campaign that had begun as a symphony of engines was turning into a whisper of winter. And in that whisper lay the sound of the German Empire breaking. In war, strategy is drawn with lines and arrows, but its true form is written in the faces of those who must carry it out. Nowhere was that truer than at Stalingrad, where two generals, each moulded by different worlds, were about to test not just tactics, but belief itself. Friedrich Paulus, commander of the German Sixth Army, was a soldier of logic. His uniform was immaculate even amid the dust. He spoke softly, kept his staff in perfect order, and believed that discipline could triumph over chaos. Born into the quiet bureaucracy of the Imperial Army, he was a man who planned every maneuver with mathematical care. War, to him, was an equation. Given enough precision, the outcome could be predicted, controlled, achieved. But Stalingrad refused to obey mathematics. The city broke all symmetry. Maps turned meaningless. Streets that existed one morning were gone by dusk. Artillery barrages erased coordinates faster than he could record them. And the soldiers he commanded, men who had marched in perfect formation through Paris, now crawled through sewers and burned out factories, hunted by enemies they couldn't see. Each day his reports became shorter, his voice more brittle. He still saluted Berlin's directives, but his eyes had begun to flicker with doubt. Somewhere deep inside, he sensed that precision had met its limit. Across the river, Vasily Zhukov lived differently. His headquarters was a bunker, half buried in mud and concrete, just 50 meters from the front line. The ceiling dripped condensation. The floor trembled with each shell. His voice was coarse, his hands scarred. He smoked constantly, coughed between sentences, and slept in bursts of 10 minutes. To his men, he was not a distant strategist, but a presence, a rough, unbreakable shape moving among them. When a young officer once asked him what their orders were, Zhukov replied without looking up, "Hold the riverbank. If you die, do it facing west." He had learned early that the city's ruins were allies. He ordered his units to hug the Germans, to fight so close that the Luftwaffe dared not bomb for fear of hitting their own troops. The tactic turned the war into a knife fight. Distance, artillery, air superiority, none of it mattered anymore. Only endurance. Paulus and Zhukov never met, yet the rhythm of their decisions beat in counterpoint. Paulus measured kilometers, Zhukov measured heartbeats. The German general sought order in the storm. The Soviet commander became the storm. In the silence between their choices lay the future of the entire Eastern Front. Outside, the snow thickened. The ruins of Stalingrad steamed in the cold, iron, blood, and smoke fusing into one colourless breath. Men on both sides began to forget what month it was. Time dissolved into the rhythm of gunfire, the scream of shells, the brief warmth of vodka, the frozen silence afterward. And over all of it, two men kept watching the same river from opposite shores, each waiting for the other to break. Neither yet understood that winter itself had chosen its side. November 19th, 1942. The steppe was frozen glass under a pale, indifferent sun. For months, the Germans had believed winter was their ally, proof of their endurance. The same cold that had crushed Napoleon's Grand Armée now expected to finish off the Soviets. They were wrong. This time, the blizzard belonged to Russia.
Street by street,
at 0720 hours, the horizon erupted. From the north and south of Stalingrad, two Soviet fronts, Voronezh and Southwestern, unleashed the storm they had built in silence. Thousands of artillery pieces fired in perfect unison, the sound a single rolling thunder that split the steppe open. The ground shook as if the earth itself had turned against the invader. Through the smoke came the Red Army, waves of tanks, men in white camouflage, their breath visible, their rifles gleaming with frost. It was not a counterattack. It was vengeance with coordinates. The German flanks crumbled almost instantly. They were held not by the armoured elite of the Reich, but by its allies, Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian divisions starved of equipment and already brittle with fear. Soviet T-34s smashed through their lines like avalanches through glass. Within 48 hours, both wings of the German front had folded backward, the trap snapping shut behind the city. Inside Stalingrad, Paulus received the reports in disbelief. At first, he dismissed them as exaggeration. Then the phone lines went dead. His maps, once clean with straight arrows, blurred into chaos. By November 23rd, he realized the truth. The Sixth Army was encircled, trapped in a ring 50 kilometers wide and tightening every hour. 300,000 men surrounded in a sea of snow and silence. He sent an urgent message to Berlin. Situation critical. Request permission to break out westward. Hitler's reply came like a commandment carved in ice. Sixth Army will stand fast. The Führer forbids retreat. The decision sealed their fate. Paulus obeyed, as he always had. He fortified his positions, rationed his supplies, and waited for the promised relief. Hitler assured him that Luftwaffe air bridges would sustain the army, 500 tons of supplies a day. But when winter came in full, even steel could not fly. Fog rolled over the steppe like a living thing, swallowing airfields and freezing engines in mid-start. The few Ju-52 transport planes that reached Stalingrad landed on makeshift runways under fire, their wheels locking in the snow, unloading barely a tenth of what was needed. Each day, fewer returned. Outside the encirclement, Field Marshal Manstein's relief attempt, Operation Winter Storm, moved east with desperate courage, but it was too late. The Soviets had tightened their grip, layers of armor upon infantry, upon artillery. The Sixth Army was no longer an army. It was a patient bleeding to death, surrounded by its own ghosts. In the city, the soldiers of both sides fought in silence now. The noise of summer had become the stillness of frost. Machine guns froze in their mounts. Men fired pistols by candlelight, then used the last of their cartridges to thaw soup from snow. Every night, Paulus walked through the corridors of his headquarters in the basement of the Wehrmacht department store, the same building where once perfume and silk had been sold. Now the shelves held maps, morphine, and despair. Across the Volga, Trikov watched the northern sky glow faintly red where the artillery lit the clouds. He knew the ring had closed. He whispered to his aide, "Now the hunter becomes the prey. Let them exhaust themselves. The frost will fight with us." And the frost did fight. It cracked steel, froze blood, silenced engines, and filled the lungs of the living with the taste of rust. The noose of ice had closed, and Stalingrad was no longer a battle. It was an anatomy of collapse. By December, the sky above Stalingrad had turned the color of lead. There was no horizon anymore, just smoke and snow blurring into one motionless grey. The Volga froze over, its surface stitched with cracks that groaned like the earth's own bones. The war had slowed to the rhythm of frostbite. Inside the German perimeter, hunger moved faster than any bullet. The daily ration had dwindled to half a loaf of frozen bread per man, often mixed with sawdust. Soup was made from melted snow and the marrow of horse bones. Men chewed on leather belts when the pain grew unbearable. Typhus, dysentery, and pneumonia took more soldiers than the Soviet artillery did. In the cellars beneath the shattered city, candles burned with blue flames, fed by grease scraped from machine parts. At first, they waited for the Luftwaffe's promise, planes that never came. Then, they waited for relief from Manstein's counterattack, the thunder that never rolled. By Christmas, waiting had become the only thing left alive in the Sixth Army. General Friedrich Paulus sat in his bunker at the Wehrmacht building, wrapped in a greatcoat too thin for the cold. He wrote to his wife in a letter that would never reach her. "The city is dead, yet it still screams. I command a cemetery now." Around him, the once proud officers of the Reich had become spectres. Maps hung limp on the walls, the ink frozen to their surfaces. Orderlies shuffled quietly through corridors lined with stretchers. The air smelled of ether, rust, and something sweet. Decay beneath antiseptic. Some men spoke to the walls. Others prayed to the sound of distant engines that were never real. Above ground, the ruins of Stalingrad glowed faintly under snowdrifts that covered corpses like uneven pillows. Wolves had come down from the steppe, drawn by the scent. They moved silently through the wreckage, indistinguishable from the soldiers now crawling through the same debris. Friend and foe shared the same graveyard. Across the river, Chrikov's headquarters was barely warmer, but it vibrated with grim purpose. Reports came hourly. Street by street, the Soviets advanced, compressing the pocket. His soldiers, many scarcely more than boys, fought with sharpened spades and frozen rifles. Each block was paid for in blood, but each meter won felt like reclaiming a heartbeat of the city itself. When officers asked him how many men remained alive in his command, Chrikov's answer was simple: enough to keep fighting. In mid-January 1943, the Soviet hammer fell again. Operation Ring, the final assault, closed on the German fortress from all sides. Katyusha rockets howled through the dawn like metal banshees. Entire districts vanished in seconds beneath coordinated barrages. The Sixth Army's front lines disintegrated into smoke and silence. By January 24th, Paulus radioed Hitler. "We can no longer hold. Ammunition exhausted. Men without food or strength." Berlin replied, "Surrender is forbidden. The Sixth Army will fight to the last man and bullet." But there were no bullets left. On the night of January 30th, the 10th anniversary of Hitler's rise to power, Berlin broadcasted triumphant speeches about the heroic defenders of Stalingrad. In the basement, Paulus listened without expression. Outside, the snow whispered against the windows like ashes falling upward. He turned to his adjutant and said quietly, "The Führer should come and see his victory himself." At dawn, the Soviets broke through the southern sector. The last German positions fell like walls of sand. On January 31st, Paulus surrendered the southern pocket of Stalingrad to General Shumilov. 2 days later, the northern group capitulated. The fighting was over. In the frozen silence that followed, Soviet troops walked through a landscape that no longer resembled a city. They passed through rooms filled with soldiers sitting upright in death, their hands still around rifles that hadn't fired in days. Some had frozen mid-step, their faces peaceful, as if sleep had finally caught them mid-march. The air itself seemed brittle, carrying only the whisper of boots on snow. The battle was done. The Sixth Army, once the pride of Hitler's empire, had ceased to exist. Of the 300,000 who had entered Stalingrad, fewer than 5,000 would ever see Germany again. The rest became part of the city itself, fused into its soil, its memory, its legend. And on the eastern bank, as dawn broke over the Volga, Chkrikov stood in the open for the first time in months. He watched the smoke drift away and said to his aide, almost to himself, "It is finished. But listen, do you hear? The city is still breathing." The aide frowned. "I hear nothing, Comrade General." Chkrikov exhaled a long white plume. Exactly. The snow began to melt in March. It revealed not streets, but scars. Where the factories once stood, there were only twisted skeletons of steel, columns melted into spirals, girders blackened like old bones. The wind carried the scent of burnt metal and frozen ash. And yet, beneath that devastation, a strange rhythm pulsed again, the rhythm of rebuilding. Soviet engineers arrived first, thin men with frostbitten hands, measuring ruins with rulers and faith. Behind them came the women, the widows, the orphans. They began to clear the streets with shovels made from the same steel that had once built tanks. Each brick lifted from the rubble was a heartbeat stolen back from death. Stalingrad, a corpse city, refused burial. Across the river, the Red Army stood in silent ranks, while their commanders read the casualty lists. Names rolled like endless wind. No applause, no cheers, only the sound of breath in the cold. For every metre of ground gained, 10 lives had been spent. But in that arithmetic of sacrifice, the Soviets had found their faith renewed. The invincible Wehrmacht had been broken, not by numbers alone, but by endurance, by the refusal to yield even when logic said the fight was over. News of the victory spread across the world like a spark through dry grass. In London, church bells rang. In Washington, Roosevelt called it the turning point of the war. In Berlin, silence. For the first time, the propaganda reels faltered. The illusion of inevitability had cracked. The psychological tremor ran deeper than any military defeat. Before Stalingrad, the German soldier had marched with the certainty of destiny. After Stalingrad, he marched with doubt. The halo of invincibility, the myth of blitzkrieg, had dissolved in the snow. Even Hitler's inner circle could feel it. The Führer himself withdrew into the gloom of his bunker, pacing over maps that no longer obeyed him. In Moscow, Stalin addressed his generals with a rare tone of pride. His voice, usually cold as granite, warmed for a brief instant. "Comrades, the enemy has been stopped by the will of our people. The Volga still flows, and the name Stalingrad shall live forever." But among the ruins, there was little triumph. Victory had the taste of ashes. Zhukov visited the shattered tractor factory, walking between heaps of rusted armor and shattered glass. He stopped where one of his regiments had fought to the last man, 30 soldiers in a single room. Their weapons still leaned against the wall, their helmets frozen into the floor. He stood there for a long time, his boots crunching softly over debris. A young lieutenant approached and asked, "Comrade General, what do we do now?" Zhukov looked around. The smoke, the broken girders, the wind moving through what had once been windows, and said, "Now, we rebuild, but we never clean it all. Let the ruins speak, so no one forgets what this cost." Years later, they would erect monuments, marble statues, eternal flames, mothers carved in stone. But the true monument was invisible, the echo of footsteps in the ruins, the memory of a city that had looked into the abyss and refused to blink. The strategic tide of the Second World War had turned irrevocably. From Stalingrad would come Kursk, the march to Minsk, the drive through Poland, and finally Berlin. Each victory traced its origin to that frozen bend of the Volga, where men and women had proven that steel was only as strong as the hands that held it. And in the chronicles of war, historians would write of tanks and tactics, of divisions and supplies. But somewhere between those lines, the ghosts of Stalingrad would whisper another truth, that the will to endure, once awakened, is the most powerful weapon a nation can forge. History does not breathe in victory parades. It breathes in silence, after the guns have stopped, when the snow covers both friend and enemy alike, and the world tries to remember how to speak again. Stalingrad became that silence. Years later, when historians unfurled their maps and generals wrote their memoirs, they searched for logic amid the ashes. They called it the turning point, the decisive battle, the proof of total war. They spoke of logistics, of Hitler's mistakes, of the brilliance of Soviet planning. But those explanations, however precise, missed the essence. Because Stalingrad was never just a battle of armies. It was a collision of faiths, one born of domination, the other of survival. The Wehrmacht came east as engineers of empire. They believed war could be calculated, like an equation written in steel and fuel. They believed courage could be mechanized. At Stalingrad, they discovered that courage cannot be engineered. It bleeds, it freezes, it breaks, but it endures. They discovered that man, when stripped of everything, uniform, rank, ideology, still clings to one instinct that no doctrine can extinguish, to hold. For the Soviets, the victory was more than triumph. It was vindication that suffering itself could become strategy. That patience, when fused with fury, could outlast precision. That in the age of machines, the human heart remained the last unbreakable engine. And beyond tactics and theories, the battle left a question hanging over the future of warfare. If Stalingrad could happen once, if entire nations could be consumed by a single city, what then was the true limit of human endurance? Or was there none? In the decades that followed, the ruins were rebuilt, the river cleaned of wreckage, the factories roared again. Children played where tanks once burned. But beneath the soil, millions of stories slept, each bone a syllable in the epic of survival. The city lived, not as a monument of victory, but as a reminder of the cost of belief. In the museum today, visitors stand before a single artifact, a rifle fused to a girder by heat. It no longer looks like a weapon, nor a machine. It looks like something that tried to become eternal and almost succeeded.